Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. You're picking up a signal from a place most people never knew existed, and now probably never will. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm not broadcasting for fame or rescue. I don't expect either. I'm here because someone has to speak the truth while there's still power to carry a voice across water. My name is Dr. Mason Keller. I served 22 years as a combat field surgeon in the US Army. That means I've seen a lot of things a person shouldn't have to see, but nothing like this. I've treated men torn apart by shrapnel and chewed up by their own fear. I've patched limbs, reattached jaws, dug bullets out of bone. That life taught me one thing above all else. Survival doesn't come from luck, it comes from preparation. So I retired early, started planning, stockpiling. Not because I had proof of what was coming, but because I believed something was. And now it's here. It's the morning of July 3rd, overcast, no sun, winds pushing in from the west, just enough to rattle the fencing and make you glance over your shoulder. I've been up since dawn, walking the lines, checking the traps, watching the water. I do it every morning. Muscle memory now. But this morning feels different. People used to imagine the end of the world as something loud. Explosions, sirens, flash and fire. But it didn't come like that. It came quietly. It came like breath on glass. A fungal spore drifting across oceans, catching rides on wind, on rain, on skin. It didn't roar. It settled. It found its way into our systems, into our cities, and into our blood without anyone noticing. This isn't a war. There are no battle lines. There's just infection, expansion, infiltration. The kind that takes everything, including your thoughts. I first heard rumors about it 2 years ago. Fungal psychosis outbreaks in Brazil and southern Vietnam. The news buried it under heat waves and protests. But I remembered the South American lab collapse in 24. Government wouldn't say much about it. You don't get 11 dead field virologists in hazmat suits and then pretend it's just mold. I talked to my brother, pushed harder than usual. He didn't laugh this time, just poured 2 drinks and said, "Buy the rest of the southern bluff and reinforce the doors." That's when I knew he wasn't telling me everything. He'd worked with companies that modeled worst-case simulations, pathogen modeling, network collapse, civil decay. You don't need a pandemic to see how fast systems snap, but a pandemic helps. There are 6 of us here, me and my wife Elena, my brother Grant, his wife Lila, their daughter Maddie, and 2 men who helped build and maintain this place, Callum and Ray, both ex-Navy electricians. Both owed Grant favors I never asked about. But they stayed, took care of the pumps, the panels, the satellite dish that no longer points to anything alive. This morning, we woke up to the silence. No news feeds, no GPS weather overlays, no updates from the harbor patrols. Elena made coffee before we noticed, said the net was slow again. Maddie asked if she could go down to the dock. No games were loading. Grant tried to pull in NOAA data, and it just looped. That was when the pit started to open. We switched to shortwave. I hadn't turned on the old gear since last hurricane season, but the moment I did, there it was. Noise. Layers of overlapping signals. Some automated, some human, some crying, some issuing instructions. I recorded a few, played them back slower. Most of the clean signals were from naval vessels. Contagion uncontrolled. Infection persists after death. And do not engage hostiles without full facial shielding. One of them was a British accent. Very calm. Said to stay inland. Said not to trust the frost zones anymore. Said the fungus had adapted to low temperatures and extended viability. Elena sat on the stairs while I wrote it all down. She didn't speak for a while. She's been calm through years of my prepping. She never mocked it, never fully believed it either. But this morning, she brought me her go bag without saying a word, placed it by the hatch, zipped. That's how I know it's real. The world is gone. Maybe not all of it, but enough of it to say the collapse isn't coming. It already came. Grant and I walked the perimeter just after that. He said he was picking up intermittent satellite relays from a research team in Iceland. Said the fungus is evolving too fast. Zonal drift, behavioral clusters, migratory patterns. I asked what that meant for us, and he just looked at me and said, "It means nothing's immune anymore. You can't outrun wind. Not forever. We've sealed the vents, burned the thatch on the east side. We're keeping Maddie inside now. She doesn't understand yet. She's 9. Bright. Smarter than I ever was. But still just a kid. She keeps asking where the fish went, keeps asking why the lights on the mainland blink off at night and don't come back on. I haven't answered her yet. I made my first broadcast just before noon. It wasn't meant for anyone in particular. Just anyone. I told the truth, or at least the pieces of it I understand. I said the outbreak isn't a hoax. It's not a political stunt or a hacked water system. It's not the flu. It's fungal, neurological. It begins subtly. Reduced inhibition, emotional flooding, difficulty with speech coordination, then tremors, increased aggression, sensory degradation. And once the mycelium network takes hold, the host is no longer in control. The worst part isn't the death, it's what comes after. Grant said one of the last messages he caught from a DC lab mentioned persistent motor activity post-mortem, the kind of phrase you only use when you're trying to avoid saying the obvious. The dead move, and they move with purpose. This isn't superstition, this isn't fiction, this is biology corrupted by opportunity. The perfect storm of global travel, antibiotic overuse, and climate disruption, and now it's airborne in some regions. I've trained all my life to patch bodies back together, but there's no patching this. The wind's shifted again. I can feel it at the back of my neck. Not cold, not warm, just wrong. You know how storms feel before they hit? That charge in the air like something ancient remembering how to bite. That's how the sky feels now. I saw 3 gulls this afternoon circling low. They flew without the usual rhythm, no banking, no coasting, just direct loops. One of them hit the water and never came up. When I looked through the scope, I swear I saw growths along its wing joints. That's when I asked Elena to boil everything from the catch nets. We're cutting off seawater intake for now. Going full ration mode, rainwater only. The tanks are clean, double filtered, and pressure sealed. I've checked them twice. Still, I don't trust anything lately. Not the birds, not the wind, not even my own voice when I hear it bounce back in static. Callum's asked to move into the southern storage unit full-time. Said he doesn't want to risk the main house. I understand. We've reinforced the hatch with steel crossbars and turned the outer vents into directional traps. UV lamps inside motion-triggered housings. Not perfect, but enough to disorient anything dumb enough to crawl in. Tonight we'll do our first rotation. I'll take the midnight slot. Grant and I agreed. No one is to be alone for more than an hour without check-in. If you start showing symptoms, speech slipping, orientation off, irrational outbursts, you report it immediately. And if you don't, well, we agreed on that too. I'm not afraid of dying. I've had guns drawn on me. I've been through chemical events that turned men into shadows in their suits. What I fear, what really sits under my ribs, is what this infection makes you do before the end, the way it rewrites the human will, the way it imitates memory, voice, thought. There's a phrase the field biologists used in the old papers, behavioral mimicry of the host. It means the fungus learns from the brain it eats. It means it doesn't just consume, it copies. That's why we keep the radio logs. That's why I record everything now, in case I stop being me. If you're hearing this and you're still clean, find high ground. Seal your air. Don't wait for help. It's not coming. This is Mason Keller, signing off from the Southern Bluff. If the wind holds, I'll speak again in a few hours. It's just past midnight. I'm the only one awake. The wind's eased up. No birds tonight. No waves either. Just the quiet hum of solar backup in the station walls and the occasional rattle from the air filtration unit. If silence had a weight, it would be sitting right behind my eyes. The kind of quiet that makes you listen harder than you should. The kind that lets your imagination wander into rooms it was never meant to enter. I said earlier that the collapse didn't start loud. That's true. But the real beginning wasn't even the fungus itself. It was the denial. The first emergency alert came through while I was visiting Elena's sister in Charleston. This was early May. 2 months ago now. We were sitting in traffic just outside the bridge when the sirens triggered. Not the usual weather tones. This one was short, shrill, almost like a regional evacuation drill. We pulled over like everyone else, turned the radio up, waited for instructions. What came instead was a FEMA alert that flickered and cut off mid-transmission. Something about a contained biological incident at a research facility near Wilmington. It never said what the agent was, just that nearby communities were under a temporary mobility restriction. No other details. A quick blip, then static. We didn't panic. No one around us did either. That's how we're wired now. Desensitized by alerts and overexposed to crisis headlines. Elena just glanced at me, like she knew I was already forming a plan. I kept it to myself at first. She still thought we'd be home by the weekend. Later that night, the local news ran a segment saying it was a chemical spill, a bad one. They blamed it on industrial runoff from a pharmaceutical transport. Said a few people got exposed, but recovery teams were on site. They showed blurred footage of men in level A suits pulling someone out of a canal. The person looked stiff, rigid, limbs locked straight. The clip ended before we could see more. The networks dropped the story the next morning. I scoured the feeds for more info, found maybe 2 amateur videos, both already marked with fact-check warnings. One showed a man stumbling into traffic near a commuter train in Raleigh. He had blood trailing from his nose, and his arms jerked like a puppet without strings. He collapsed against a guardrail and didn't move. Comments below said he'd attacked paramedics. One post said he tried to bite through the face shield of a first responder. I called Grant. He didn't answer at first, which was unusual. When he finally did, I could hear a generator in the background. He sounded breathless, not scared, focused, said the data coming through his private network was disturbing. Cluster events in 7 states. Not just Wilmington, not just Raleigh. Isolated towns, metro hospitals, airport security zones. The symptoms were consistent: incoherent speech, uncontrollable rage, loss of pain response, and finally, catatonic collapse followed by reanimation within 10 minutes. We've seen diseases hijack behavior before: rabies, toxoplasmosis, the classic examples. But this wasn't just aggression. This was coordinated hostility, something that knew how to strike soft targets, how to swarm, how to trap. It's hard to explain if you haven't seen the footage. It didn't look like madness. It looked deliberate. That was when the name first showed up. Cordyceps, H27, later shortened to OCH, but the press gave it something else: the rage mold. And once it had a nickname, people stopped taking it seriously again. That's how things go, isn't it? Turn a threat into a meme, make it digestible. The CDC held a press conference 3 days after the Wilmington breach, claimed the infection was fungal, but not contagious between humans. Said the current transmission vectors were environmental only, likely originating from a compromised grain storage facility linked to imported produce. I remember watching it in the hotel room, jaw clenched. They emphasized that it was localized, that there was no reason for public concern. Said the term zombie-like, being used online, was inflammatory and scientifically inaccurate. I've seen enough frontline press conferences to recognize controlled panic when I hear it. They kept saying the neurological symptoms were non-permanent in early-stage exposure. They used words like altered cognition, limbic activation, and aggressive psychotic break. Nothing about the fact that victims often stopped breathing, only to start again minutes later, under motor function completely divorced from normal control. The reanimation window became the red line. Once you passed it, you weren't a person anymore. You weren't even considered infectious. You were just active, a vector, a thing to burn. The military moved in fast, I'll give them that. Within 48 hours of the leak, whole sectors of eastern seaboard cities were under silent lockdown. No official declarations, just roadblocks, subtly diverted flights, hospital quarantines. Even the ferry lines from smaller islands like this one got rerouted, until ours was the only one still unlisted. I got a hold of a contact in Norfolk, someone I knew from back during the Mop 4 drills. He confirmed what Grant had feared. The virus wasn't just spreading, it was being misclassified on purpose. They wanted to buy time, keep markets steady, prevent a nationwide collapse of movement. But it was already too late. The host behavior showed signs of learning, repeating patterns, avoiding bright lights, responding to sudden sounds, almost like it was tracking. There was one internal memo, someone at Grant's firm leaked it, that mentioned neural redundancy via fungal biofilm. The way I read it, the infection doesn't need your brain to survive. It replaces it, or rather, builds something parallel to it, a nervous system within a nervous system. The host isn't gone all at once, it's just being rewritten. Some hosts retain speech, broken sentences, pleas for help, calls for their children. That's the part no one talks about, because when the thing in front of you looks and sounds like someone you love, and it moves toward you with the same face, the same voice, how do you shoot that? That's why it spreads, not because we're unprepared, but because we're human. I spoke with a woman over shortwave earlier, don't know her name. Her signal was faint, probably somewhere in the Outer Banks. She said she watched her sister wake up after an attack, 20 minutes after being declared dead. Eyes fogged, skin veined with white mold, but still blinking, still trying to speak. She said she locked her in the garage, then barricaded the door and ran. She was crying when the signal cut. That was a week ago. We haven't heard anything from that frequency since. I wonder sometimes if it would have mattered, telling the truth early. Would people have believed it? Would they have run? Or just scrolled past the headline? I spent years telling myself that knowledge would be enough, that if I could just spot the signs, track the spread, build the bunker, everything would hold. But now, I watch the sun rise over a dead horizon, and I realize we're not built for this. Not really. Not when the enemy doesn't come in tanks or fall from the sky, but grows inside us, in silence. I think that's why the early response failed. Not because the science was wrong, but because no one wanted to look in the mirror and admit we'd created the perfect petri dish. Global shipping, climate disruption, fungicide-resistant strains, decades of ignoring spore blooms in places like the Congo, the Andes, the remote Arctic lakes thawing just fast enough to wake old things. We laughed at the idea that a fungus could end the world. Now it's walking through our cities. And the worst part? It doesn't need to win. It just needs to last longer than we do. I need to wrap this segment up. Battery's at 60%, and I want to leave enough charge for the midday broadcast. I'll be going back out at first light to check the traps and seal the northern outflow. Maddie says she heard something last night, clacking noises near the brush line. Could have been wind, could have been nothing. But out here, nothing is never just nothing. If you're alive out there, keep your filters dry and your lights warm. Don't trust anyone moving too fast. And if someone speaks with a familiar voice but doesn't look at you right, don't open the door. I'll be back in 12 hours. I don't know how long I'll be able to keep these broadcasts going. Power's holding, but the satellite relay stutters more with each passing day. My brother thinks the orbital grid is failing. Not all at once, just bleeding signal as the automated maintenance platforms go dark. He showed me a diagnostics chart last night. Packet losses from most major satellites jumped 30% in a week. The ones still active have begun rotating through old emergency backup bands. That wasn't supposed to happen for another 20 years, but nothing about this collapse is on schedule. Before it all shut down, I managed to pull and save a decent cache of global feeds, government updates, amateur drone footage, scanned radio logs, encrypted satellite packets. Grant decrypted most of it with some old defense contractor tools. We spent 2 straight nights just cataloging what we had. Then another 2 in silence. Let me tell you what the rest of the world looked like before it went dark. Germany lasted longer than I thought it would. Early lockdowns, precision quarantine zones, civil obedience. For a while, they even managed to create spore-free corridors between population centers using fire break lines and mobile disinfection chambers. But Berlin fell in less than 30 hours once the Rhine broke. A refugee convoy from the Netherlands breached containment with 3 infected hidden in cargo. One bit a nurse at the Feldkirch checkpoint. She showed symptoms in 4 hours. By dawn, half the corridor was compromised. The next day, a military convoy ran over 100 civilians trying to escape the firebomb zone near Potsdam. After that, the government fragmented. Some kind of interim council took over, but I don't know if it held. All I know is the last aerial drone footage shows tens of thousands fleeing into the Bavarian Alps with no support. France imploded, not because of the infected, at least not at first, but because of its own people. Half the country didn't believe the fungus was real. The other half thought it was synthetic, made in a lab as a population control weapon. Protesters stormed the Pasteur Institute in Paris, burned it to the ground. A week later, mutated strains of OCH were reported in Marseille, Lille, and Toulouse. Too many outbreaks in too many places. No common origin. That's when the riots began. I found footage of police stations overrun by mobs, pharmacies gutted, hospitals evacuated by force. One video showed a group of municipal workers using their own children as shields to force their way onto a relief ship in the port of Calais. That was the last boat that left before the channel was blockaded. The captain radioed for help, said they had 6 infected on board, said the kids were coughing. No one responded. That vessel drifted for days. Its beacon pinged just once off the coast of Ireland. Then it went silent. China was the first to implement full martial law, and I mean full, armed drones, satellite lockdowns, regional grid isolation. They blacked out entire provinces overnight. Anyone with a suspected exposure was locked inside their homes, and in some cases, buried in them. Reports claim they detonated entire residential zones using pre-installed demolition charges from old urban renewal projects. Deny it all you want, but the heat maps don't lie. You don't lose 12 million square feet of dense urban sprawl without leaving a crater. Still, for a while, it worked. The central government claimed near 0 cases after the first month, but the truth came through foreign contractors fleeing on corporate planes. I read the translations. The outbreak wasn't contained. It went underground, into mining cities, subway tunnels, bio-waste disposal sectors, and when it resurfaced, it did so with coordinated outbreaks across 36 provinces in the same 12-hour window. That kind of synchronization doesn't happen naturally. The Middle East fragmented fast. Lines drawn not by religion, not by nation, but by water. Whoever controlled clean sources controlled the last semblance of order. In Iraq, the Nineveh region held out for a long time using ancient stone irrigation channels as decontamination systems. But once the fungus started binding with silt and sediment, even that failed. I read a report from a UN peacekeeper stationed in a dome shelter outside Mosul. He said the infected didn't just walk, some of them waited, dug themselves into loose earth during the heat, only to rise again after sunset, like the fungus was learning to conserve its hosts. Russia pulled the plug on external contact early. They shut down all outbound signals, razed their own border towns, and disappeared into the interior, but not before leaking a chilling internal memo, translated into English, then posted anonymously. It said, "This is not a contagion. It is a replacement. Nothing else. Just that." South America burned. Brazil tried to wall itself off, but the rainforest made that impossible. The infection wasn't just human, it was animal too. Monkeys, dogs, even birds. One report showed fungal behavior in a colony of vampire bats. Their flight paths shifted, formations became circular, coordinated. The footage looked like a school of fish. But in the sky, Argentina collapsed from the inside. Not due to the infected, but due to hunger. Entire cities were sealed off to prevent spore migration, and instead of relocation efforts, they cut power and airlifted guards out. People died in the streets with food trucks parked half a mile away, keys still in the ignition. Those who survived the first wave turned to the old methods. Salt, fire, blunt tools. The worst were the betrayal stories. Family members turning each other in for a seat on outbound transport that never arrived. Mexico City's fall came from the sea. Cargo ships rerouted from infected zones weren't checked properly before docking. A single longshoreman made contact with a contaminated hull. 7 days later, the streets were unrecognizable. Not just overrun, transformed. You could see fungal blooms on the rooftops, spores drifting like dust through subway grates. One drone operator described the city as pulsing, like it was breathing, alive. In the United States, things didn't fall apart all at once. We had warning, but we argued over the signal instead of the fire. Washington tried to hold. The president issued national shelter orders 2 days after the CDC lost control of Atlanta. FEMA tried to implement nationwide airlock checkpoints using hospital tents and ultraviolet foggers. But the infrastructure wasn't built for it. The moment power started failing, the checkpoints became tombs. People suffocated waiting for results. Some reanimated inside sealed tents, infected responders before anyone knew they were exposed. Then came the breadlines. Then came the blackouts. Civilian militias formed in almost every state. Some tried to do good, coordinate food, guard refugee convoys. Others turned into roaming enforcers. At least 3 state governors went missing. One, I believe, was executed live on a hijacked emergency channel, broadcast directly to a region of Oklahoma that had sealed itself off from federal intervention. I've never been able to confirm if it was real, but I saved the audio. His voice was clear, unbroken, no panic, just acceptance. The most tragic collapse came from the western seaboard. California implemented strict spore control protocols early on, rolling blackouts, underground filtration, off-grid med centers. They held out longer than most expected, but once the aqueducts were compromised, people turned on each other. Los Angeles burned from the inside. Bay Area towers went dark in under a week, and San Diego, the last major port still moving uninfected cargo, was swallowed in 2 days. A hospital ship, the Arc Meridian, was the last to flee. She sent out a full manifest, listed every child on board. Then silence. That was the moment I realized we weren't waiting for help anymore. There was no help. There were moments of hope too. Iceland tried to create a floating research zone off the Arctic shelf. They even claimed early breakthroughs in synthetic counterfungals. But the last message I received from them was corrupted, broken code and a single sentence. Cognition intact past death. Do not respond to memory recall. One woman in Quebec, a former microbiologist, transmitted a homemade guide on sealing off suburban homes into pressure-neutral microenvironments using garbage bags and HVAC sealant. Her broadcasts ran for 6 straight days, clear, concise, confident. She helped people. She gave hope. I tried to respond, never got an answer. And now, we're down to fragments, static, old signals replaying themselves like ghosts. The world didn't end in one bang, it ended in 10,000 cracks. Some loud, some soft, some so quiet you only noticed once the air felt thinner. This isn't a countdown, it's already 0. You just haven't heard it yet. If you're still out there, conserve your power. Filter your water twice. Trust only what you can verify with your own eyes. And never follow voices calling from the dark. They remember how to sound human, but they're not. Not anymore. It's evening now, just after 1900 hours. Sunset's caught in the haze again, orange and gold against a sky that looks dusted with flour. It's not fog. I know fog. Grew up in Maine. This haze settles wrong. It clings to the treetops and lingers in the hollows behind the storage units longer than it should. I watched a sunbeam cut through it earlier. It lit up with suspended particles like glitter in a child's snow globe. I haven't told others, but I sealed the primary vents leading into the sleeping quarters. We're officially on internal air now. Circulation's going to get stale fast, but I'm not risking an airborne breach. Not after what I heard today. We've been rotating shortwave scans every 6 hours. Grant wrote a looping diagnostic script that filters out auto-repeating loops and flags, anything with fresh amplitude variance. It's a crude way of hunting for live voices in the static, but it works. And today, we caught some. 4 new signals. None lasted more than 15 minutes, but all of them were from people. The first was a cargo ship. I couldn't catch its name. Signal was too garbled, but the voice was male, late 30s by the sound of it. He identified himself as First Officer Kamal, said he was transmitting from a Liberian-flagged bulk freighter off the coast of the Carolinas. He didn't say what they were carrying, just that they'd been drifting for 5 days after the last port denied entry. Charleston, then Jacksonville, then finally an unnamed port in the Bahamas, turned away every time. His voice was shaking, but measured. Said they had 15 crew, 2 symptomatic, 1 locked in the infirmary, 1 restrained in a utility closet. He didn't know which one was still alive. Their radio mast had been damaged in a storm, and they were running off auxiliary power. I tried to respond, but he couldn't hear me. All I could do was record him. He ended the transmission with a single phrase. We didn't know the engineer was bitten. That's the common thread in all of these. No one ever thinks they've been exposed until it's too late. This strain doesn't always show symptoms right away. Some infections progress in hours. Others lie dormant for days. Maybe more. Depends on the fungal load, the vector, the route of exposure. And then, one moment, someone forgets to cover a cough or wipes their eye with the back of a glove and it begins. The second signal was heartbreaking. A woman, young, maybe 20, transmitting from a rooftop in downtown Atlanta. She said she was a nurse before the outbreak. Said she'd been trapped inside a clinic with 9 patients when the evacuation order came down. No one came for them. She broke open a vending machine, rationed soda and protein bars, boiled water in a desk lamp using copper wire. When the first patient turned, she didn't run. She sedated him, then barricaded the hallway. By the time she radioed us, she was the only one left. Said the streets below were crawling. Said she could see dozens of them just circling the building. No coordination, just instinct. Waiting. She asked for advice. Said she had 1 flare left and a small fire extinguisher. No gun, no rope. I told her to stay low, avoid corners, keep windows covered. I recited the steps like they meant something. She never responded again. The third signal came from somewhere I didn't expect, upstate New York. A man broadcasting from a ham radio setup in what he called an abandoned summer camp. Said he was part of a group of 6, all adults, mixed backgrounds, 1 former EMT, 1 librarian, 1 old Coast Guard radio operator. They'd turned the camp mess hall into a crude clean room using saran wrap, weather sealant, and duct tape. He said it looked ridiculous, but it held. What impressed me most was how calm he sounded. Said they hadn't seen an infected in 2 days. Said they were on rain catchment and canned goods. Said they had enough fuel to keep the generator going another week. Maybe more if they rationed. He asked if we had access to any spore sampling kits or UV detection strips. I told him we didn't. He just said, figured, had to try. That was it. Then the signal dropped below traceable range. Still, that was the first time in weeks I heard someone talk about planning, like it meant a future. The fourth signal wasn't a conversation, just a loop. Automated voice, FEMA region marker. It listed coordinates off the coast of Washington state and repeated a phrase 3 times. Isolation protocol, theta in effect, no disembarkation allowed, do not respond to human vocalizations beyond perimeter. Then silence. I checked the coordinates. They point to a decommissioned radar platform just west of the San Juan Islands. If there's anyone alive out there, they're either military or scared enough to pretend they still are. I saved all 4 logs. They'll replay after this broadcast. Now, if you're still alive, still untouched by the fungus, still breathing clean air, listen carefully. These are the hard-learned lessons. Not theory, not internet rumor, just what we know. These are the rules. How to avoid infection. Air control is everything. Do not breathe unfiltered air in suspected outbreak zones. Even brief exposure can lead to colonization if spore load is high. Use N95 or P100 masks, preferably with carbon filters. Do not reuse filters unless you can bake them in a sealed metal container at 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes or more. Avoid moisture and rot zones. Fungal growth thrives in damp conditions, rotting buildings, cellars, abandoned basements. If a structure smells sweet or earthy in a place it shouldn't, leave. Some spores emit mycotoxins that disorient or sedate. If you feel dizzy without reason, evacuate. Never touch bare skin without decontamination. Spore clusters can cling to clothing, hair, and exposed surfaces. If you've been outside, even just for a minute. Decon with diluted bleach solution, 1:10 ratio, or 91% isopropyl alcohol. Dry wash if water is unavailable, but do not ignore contamination protocols. Avoid corpses, even quiet ones. This strain can remain dormant post-mortem for up to 48 hours. Movement may not be immediate. Do not trust stillness. Do not bury infected close to base camp. Burn if possible, and always wear full protection during body disposal. Don't follow familiar voices. The infected may retain partial vocal function. Some repeat phrases, names, cries for help. Do not engage, do not approach. The closer they mimic, the more advanced the takeover. UV light disrupts navigation, temporarily. While not a cure, high-intensity UV light causes confusion in exposed carriers. Use flood lamps at choke points. UV traps near entrances. But don't rely on this alone. Some variants adapt within days. Never shelter in places you didn't seal yourself. You don't know who's been there, what came through, or what died inside. If it wasn't built, cleaned, and secured by you, it's not safe. Food and water must be covered at all times. Spores can settle on exposed surfaces. Use metal containers, not plastic. Boil all rainwater. Seal all food items after every use. Spores can survive in warm grains for weeks. Group size matters. Too many people, and you can't track who's sick. Too few, and you won't survive defense rotations. Keep it between 4 and 7, any more, and trust becomes a liability. Don't waste time on the old world. It's not coming back. There is no rescue convoy. There is no central authority. Survival is local now. Everything else is a ghost. I don't know how many people are still out there. Maybe a few thousand. Maybe more. Most of us won't meet. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from each other. That's what this broadcast is. Not a lifeline, an archive, a map of what not to do, a slow unfolding of what happens when systems fail and only instinct remains. We're not the top of the food chain anymore. Not really. We just think we are, because we still remember cities, still remember rules, still remember the sound of someone else's voice on the phone. But the fungus doesn't care about memory. It cares about reproduction. It cares about movement, heat, moisture, pathways. And it's learning faster than we are. I'll run the recorded signals next. If you hear a voice you recognize, don't hope too hard. A familiar sound doesn't mean a safe one. This is Mason Keller, Arcadia Island. Still morning, still calm. And I thought, for once, it might be worth using this airtime not to talk about what we've lost, but what we've kept, what we built. For those still out there, you need to understand that survival isn't just bullets and barricades. It's rhythm, it's discipline, and sometimes it's the illusion of routine. We made a life here after all. Not a normal one, not the kind with paychecks and weekend errands and rush hour traffic, but a functional life. Quiet, self-contained, and in its own strange way, good. There are 6 of us, each with a role. Not because we picked them, but because the island, its size, its limitations, its needs, assigned them. That's how it works when there's nowhere to run. You find your place, or you become a problem. And problems here get fixed fast. I start the morning rotation just before sunrise, always have. I wake at first light, gear up, and do the perimeter walk. North fence to west post, then east clearing to the southern slope. We've strung a few motion sensors and trip alarms using salvaged parts from an old warehouse run, but I still check everything by eye. I trust my eyes more than a flickering LED. By the time I get back, Eleanor is already boiling water for the day. She keeps the kitchen functional. Both kitchens, technically. There's the main prep space in the house and the auxiliary fire pit setup we use when fuel runs low. She does more than just cook. She handles inventory, painstakingly. Every can logged, every filter cartridge measured, every spoonful of salt marked. It's not because she's obsessive. It's because she used to be a nurse. And habits like that don't die just because the world around you did. She's the reason we still have coffee. Real coffee. Not much left, but we ration it out like treasure. A half scoop per day. Drip filtered through a mesh she stitched herself using steel wire from the old solar frame. That morning cup has become more than comfort. It's a ritual, a reminder we're still us. Lila runs the gardens. She wasn't meant to be here long term, just helped set up the hydro trays and stayed on when everything else went sideways. She has a quiet confidence, like the kind you find in people who've already lost everything once before. She grows greens in stacked troughs, rotates root vegetables in the raised beds, and even managed to keep one tomato vine alive through the last storm season. A miracle, really. She spends hours with those plants, brushing her fingers along the stems, checking the color of the soil, whispering things I can't hear. Some days I think the plants answer her. Maddie, Grant's daughter, is the only one still young enough to pretend the world outside doesn't exist. She's 9, smart, absurdly smart, reads things most adults would ignore, draws maps from memory, keeps a field journal she won't let anyone else read. Grant tried to correct her once about how a filtration pump worked, and she proved him wrong with a sketch she drew from watching me rebuild it 2 months earlier. She does her part too. No one is above labor here. She sweeps the concrete pads, feeds the chickens. We only have 3 left now, and organizes the dry pantry by expiration date. But her real gift is keeping us from unraveling. She hums to herself. She asks questions. She still hopes. And in a place like this, that's more useful than a gun. Ray and Callum are our hands. Grant's old contractor contacts, or something close to it. He never said. They came during the first construction push and stayed. We never asked why. Didn't need to. They know circuits, plumbing, solar wiring, engine repair, water pumps, the things that make this place run. Every week, they clean the filters, test the UV lamps, and check for rot in the root cellar. They argue constantly about tools, schedules, old baseball stats. But when things need fixing, they move like parts of the same machine. Ray spends more time up high. He's the one who rigged the radio mast and stabilizer frame. Callum prefers the tunnels and tanks, the stuff no one wants to crawl through. I asked him once why he always volunteered for the tight spaces. He shrugged and said, "Don't like seeing the sky too much anymore." And then there's Grant. He stays behind the curtain, so to speak. He's not lazy, far from it, but his role isn't physical. He's the planner, the risk manager, the one who watches the solar logs, recalibrates the battery loads, and tracks our power usage down to the last flickering bulb. When things need balancing, food, fuel, air, he's the one who writes the charts. Cold logic, clinical decisions. We don't always like them, but we need them. He installed the air quality monitors himself, rewrites the firmware weekly, says it's not good to trust the defaults. I believe him. Daily life moves in cycles. Wake, patrol, filter, check traps, burn waste, boil water, inventory, rotate, repeat. Nothing gets wasted. We measure time by the health of the battery banks and the temperature of the root cellar. Our evenings end early, just after sunset. Everyone sleeps light. Everyone hears things at night. The sky's different now. The stars don't always shine the way they used to. Some nights, there's a glow near the horizon that shouldn't be there. We don't talk about it. Maybe it's the mainland. Maybe it's fires. Maybe it's something worse. But we keep going. Once a week, I power up the main rig and sweep for signals. I log every voice I hear, every broken loop, every bit of static. Most of the time, it's just echoes, repeats, ghosts. But sometimes, there's something real, a breath, a phrase, a warning. Sometimes someone's out there, and maybe, just maybe, they're listening to me now. I used to track wind patterns for storms, hurricanes mostly. Used the weather console I installed out here when Grant and I first bought the island. Back then, I monitored it for rainfall, barometric shifts, hurricane surges, things that could rip out a solar panel or flood the root cellar. Now I track it for something worse, for airborne roots, for the drift. We'd always believed that the island was safe, not just because of its remoteness, though that helped, but because of its design. We sealed every air vent, every crawl space, every intake. The filtration system runs off HEPA 14 backups. The rainwater filters were triple layered. We had enough bleach stockpiled to clean a school. I believed that would be enough. But this morning, I saw something that made my stomach turn cold. I stepped outside to inspect the intake tower on the southern ridge. The tower's elevated, 20 feet off the ground on a reinforced steel frame. It pulls in outside air, runs it through a pre-filtration system, and dumps it into the isolation tanks for testing before we switch it over to the living spaces. Nothing goes untested, or so we thought. Today, when I opened the primary seal on the filter hood, I found a thick film of yellow-grey dust across the mesh screen. At first, I thought it was sea spray, algae particulate maybe, dried from the night wind. But when I brushed it with the tip of a gloved finger, it clung, sticky, threaded, not fine dust, fibrous residue. It wasn't organic debris from the ocean, it was alive. I sealed the hood immediately, took the glove straight into the burn barrel. Then I ran back to the station, sealed the outer hatch, and initiated full airlock mode. I've only done that twice before. Once during an electrical fire, once during a hurricane surge test. Never for a contamination threat. Never because the wind carried death. I'm not a mycologist. I'm not even a virologist. But I've spent enough time around field labs and response zones to know what a fungal particulate field looks like. What I saw this morning was spore fall. Soft, slow and steady. It wasn't a cloud. Not like a movie. No dramatic fog bank. Just a settling haze, like pollen in spring, but deadlier and drifting. We were warned. Early on, before the satellites went down, some of the research stations mentioned aerial viability. One report out of Greenland tracked fungal particulate dispersal up to 200 miles from ground zero, said the spores could ride high-altitude currents and remain viable for days. Another signal, this one out of Argentina, reported suspected infections in areas where no human contact had occurred in weeks. The common denominator? Wind. The atmosphere is no longer a buffer, it's a carrier. The illusion of isolation is cracking. We thought the sea would protect us. That distance was enough. But if the wind can carry spores, then nowhere is immune. Not even here. Not even this island we buried money, steel, and time into. I told Grant, showed him the recordings. He didn't speak for a long time, just stared out the window at the trees swaying near the old solar shed. Then he quietly ordered the family into level 2 quarantine. No arguments, no questions. Even Maddie followed without protest. We locked down all open systems, closed off shared airspace between the two houses, activated the UV perimeter rings. Eleanor took inventory of the decontamination supplies. Callum and Ray went around checking seals, one by one, room by room. The drill we used to practice in the abstract became real today, and it's not over, because spores aren't the only thing we're watching now. Animals. 2 nights ago, we heard something on the roof of the tool shed, scraping sounds, not heavy, but frantic. Callum thought it was raccoons or tree rats, common enough out here. But when we checked the next morning, we found no droppings, no paw prints, just a long smear of something chalky across the sheet metal roof, like dried mucus laced with webbing. Eleanor sprayed it down with disinfectant and pressure washed the whole structure, but I took a sample. Under the handheld scope, it looked wrong. Fungal hyphae strands, sure, but thicker, interwoven with keratin. Grant said it out loud first. It's adapting to non-human hosts. It makes sense. Cordyceps has always been an insect parasite. The original strain, Cordyceps unilateralis, infects ants, takes over their nervous system, forces them to climb and latch to high points before sprouting fruiting bodies from their skulls. We knew that. It's why the early research suggested the jump to mammals was unlikely. But OCH, the strain we're facing now, wasn't natural. Whether it was an engineered evolution or an unintentional hybrid, it doesn't matter. It has crossed the barrier, and now we are watching the next leap. Last night, I watched a bird spiral down into the main clearing. Not like a crash, more like it stopped flying. It fluttered once, then just dropped. When I approached, it was lying on its side, mouth open, legs twitching. No visible trauma, no blood. But its pupils were glassy, off-center. I used the long tongs to move it into a bio bag and left it on the sealed observation slab. This morning, it was gone. The bag had been chewed open from the inside. We didn't sleep after that. This afternoon, Ray found 3 frogs in the water collection basin. All dead, 2 bloated, 1 collapsed inward. None of them had visible lesions, but one of them had tendrils protruding from its mouth. No mistaking it. Spores. The water. That's the part that scared me more than anything. Rainwater was our clean fallback. A closed system, UV purified, triple filtered, carbon locked. But if birds are dying mid-air and spores are drifting in layers invisible to the eye, then collection becomes contamination. We've halted all intake now, relying only on stored reserves. If it doesn't rain again for a while, good. If it does, we'll burn it off or let it evaporate before testing. And then there are the insects. Flies are showing erratic flight, not landing, just circling, buzzing in patterns that don't feel random. I watched one crawl into the intake duct on the backup generator. It didn't get stuck. It walked in. We sealed it. But the implications are grim. If insects become hosts, even briefly, they can act as short-range couriers, carrying the spores from bloom sites to isolated zones, dropping particulate onto food, water, exposed skin, breeding and dying in closed systems we thought were safe. You can't fence off a gnat. You can't quarantine a mosquito. You can only run or hide. And here, on this island, we've run out of both. The illusion is gone. This isn't a safe haven anymore. It's a delay, a holding cell with better views. But if we're breathing the same air that's been touched by birds, crossed by flies, seeded by rain, then we're already exposed. Now the question becomes, how long do we have before symptoms start? That's what keeps me up now. Not the screams, not the static, not the knowledge that the world is burning, but the knowledge that everything we did might have only bought us time. And time is a currency with no bank left to hold it. I've begun running internal symptom checks every 12 hours, cognitive assessment, coordination tests. Eleanor and I agreed to monitor each other. Grant is doing the same with Lila and Maddie. Callum and Ray each have an assigned observer. It's not about trust, it's about response time. Because once the infection takes root, the window to act closes fast. We've seen the footage. We've read the logs. Early stage symptoms are subtle. Slurred speech, disorientation, involuntary muscle twitch, impaired judgment. Then the heat starts. Internal, not external. Feverless burn. The brain flares with activity. Then goes quiet. A new network forms. Different purpose. Different orders. And then the host begins to mimic. I don't know how many more of these broadcasts I'll be able to do. The filters are weakening. The wind keeps changing. The animals are changing. I'll speak again tomorrow if I can. If not, let this record stand. The fungus does not respect walls. It does not respect distance. It does not sleep. It drifts. If you're listening, seal everything. Avoid windborne exposure. Filter all air. Boil all water. Incinerate all animal remains. Assume anything that moves can carry it. Even the smallest thing. Especially the smallest. Do not trust the quiet. That's where it waits. This is Mason Keller, still on Arcadia Island. For now. It started with the wind. It always does now. No stars tonight. Clouds pressed down hard, low and fast, like the sky wanted to bury us. Barometric pressure dropped fast after sundown. I noticed the shift around 1900 hours. The air went heavy, still, humid like something was holding its breath. Then came the crack of thunder. First one all season. Elena said it didn't sound right. Not like distance or depth, but flat, close. The rain began 20 minutes later. Heavy, slanted, the kind that finds every leak you never knew you had. It pounded the tin roof of the station like footsteps, thick and insistent. Visibility dropped below 20 feet. The wind blew in from the northwest, pushing sea mist and salt into the bluff. I shut the outer panels, turned off the high antenna, and ran the low-band reception loop instead. We were just starting to power down for the night when Callum came through the emergency line. He was shouting, said something was in the water. Ray had spotted it first, off the southern cove, a faint silhouette in the storm surge, not moving fast, just drifting. At first they thought it was debris from the mainland, maybe a shipping container washed loose or a capsized skiff. But then, lightning lit the water for half a second, and they saw it clearly. A boat. Small, fishing type. The kind you'd use for shallow runs, maybe 6 to 8 people max. No visible power, no lights, just listing in the current, nudging against the rocks. Grant and I went out with Callum and Ray, while Elena stayed behind with Maddie and Lila. We took full suits, breathers, goggles, sealed cuffs. We didn't know what we'd find, but protocol was clear. Unknown vessel, unknown vector, assume contamination, approach with extreme caution. When we reached the cove, the boat had lodged itself against the shallows. A loose tie rope dangled into the surf. The paint was chipped. The engine was out. One of the outriggers was cracked clean through. No flag, no name. But the smell, that was the first real warning. You ever smell fungal rot that's been trapped in salt water? It's not like decay. It's sweeter, almost metallic, like fruit gone sour in a metal pan. It hit us through the suits. Ray took point. He's the strongest of us. He climbed onto the deck first, didn't speak for several seconds, just stood there. When he finally did call out, his voice was thin. They're all dead. There were 5 of them. 2 on the deck, 1 slumped against the port wall, 1 inside the cabin doorway, 1 sprawled near the winch post, legs tangled in rope. None of them showed obvious trauma. No blood, no wounds, just stillness. Faces twisted, eyes open, mouths agape. The one inside the cabin had dried foam around his nose and lips. The one by the winch had white strands emerging from both ears. All 5 had spores growing around the collar and upper neck. Not fresh fruiting bodies. These were collapsed, spent. Dry patches where bursts had already occurred. They didn't die from violence. They died from inhalation, from suffocation, spore load too high, system failure, brain failure. They died breathing. We were preparing to mark and retreat when we heard it. A noise, low, wet, dragging, from inside the hull. Callum froze. His hand went to the sidearm we'd issued 2 weeks ago but never used. Ray raised the handheld UV wand. I motioned for silence. No one moved. The noise came again, like something being pulled slowly across a floor. Not rhythmic, not mechanical, just slow. Then we saw the shape, emerging from the lower hatch. It ducked its head to get through, shoulders scraping the frame. It wasn't just infected, it was changed. Swollen, waterlogged, skin stretched tight across a misshapen chest. Fungal sacs bulged along its sides, some pulsing, others ruptured and leaking fibrous gel. It had no eyes left, just sockets full of black spores. Its arms were bloated, one trailing a snapped piece of rope still wrapped around its wrist. And it moved with intention. We shouted for retreat. Ray moved first. Callum hesitated, just half a second, but it was enough. The thing lunged, not fast, but massive. The deck cracked under its weight as it threw itself forward, arms wide. Callum dove back, but the creature's hand grazed his shoulder. The contact was wet, direct. Grant and I grabbed him by the harness and pulled him down into the water. The thing hit the rail and buckled it outward with a crash that echoed off the rocks. We didn't stop running. We got Callum into the mobile decon tent behind the north generator shack within 7 minutes. Ray joined him. He'd been the closest. We forced them both through a triple bleach cycle, masks off, scrubbed raw, clothes incinerated. Then we locked them inside the secondary hut. Quarantine protocol, no exceptions. I watched Elena help Grant bolt the outer door shut. Neither of them spoke. Callum looked through the small porthole for a long time, said he felt fine, no symptoms, no heat, no confusion. But that's the thing about this strain. It doesn't scream its arrival. It waits. It rewrites. We gave them food, water, a waste container, air sealed and monitored. We told them we'd check every 6 hours. We told them we'd hope for the best. And then we stepped away, closed the final gate, and stood under the rain in silence. Now I'm here, in the station, alone. We didn't fail because we were unprepared. We didn't fail because we were careless. We failed because something got through. Drift. Rot. A boat with no power and 5 dead men, drifting across the sea until it found us. Now 2 of our own are behind a sealed door. If Callum or Ray shows symptoms, we'll have to make a decision. I'll do it if I have to. I just pray that I won't. It's mid-afternoon. The rain stopped just after noon, but the haze never lifted. The kind of wet brightness that feels like standing inside a fogged mirror. Everything outside looks warped. Trees blur at the edges. The garden fence disappears unless you're 6 feet away. I walked the perimeter twice already. Eleanor begged me not to go, but I needed to see it myself. We haven't heard from Callum or Ray in 13 hours. No fever yet. No loss of motor control. But that doesn't mean anything. We've seen people go 48 hours symptom-free before the crash. It's the quiet hours that scare me most. The waiting, the uncertainty, the hope. Because hope is dangerous now. It delays action. Delays what needs to be done. Grant hasn't left the eastern lookout. He's barely spoken since we sealed the quarantine hut. I tried to talk to him this morning. Nothing formal. Just small talk. Weather. Filtration pressure. Signal quality, but his eyes weren't with me. They were locked on the horizon like something out there was still coming. And maybe it is. Because something finally broke between us today, a conversation we've been circling since the beginning. And now that I've heard what he told me, I don't know if I'll ever look at him the same way again. I always knew Grant had connections. He made his first real money designing back-end systems for contract firms, the kind that don't put their names on buildings, firewalled data management, server security, cloud redundancies for alphabet agencies. He'd never brag about it, but the money was there, so was the access. He wasn't the guy pulling strings. He was the one giving the people with strings a map of what could go wrong. But when I started getting uneasy about that lab collapse in Brazil, when those reports about infected primates made their way through emergency forums and were instantly buried, I asked him, point blank, "Is this real?" He told me to prepare. That was a year ago. Today, he told me why. We were upstairs in the South Observatory. The light was low, rain still streaking the glass. No signal on the sat-link, just the faint hum of the battery backup. I asked him again, not politely, not as a brother, as someone who's been carrying this family on his shoulders while the world tears itself into pieces. What did you know back then? What exactly were you told? He didn't answer for a while, just stared at the window. Then he said this. 14 months ago, I was given access to a cold storage archive. Redline data package. Not a test, not a theory, a live model. The file was titled Echor Strain 7. He didn't look at me when he said it. He kept his hands folded. Still, I asked what was in the model. He said it wasn't a virus. It was a behavioral pathogen. Not coded in data, coded in biology. A hybridized, gene-edited strain of Cordyceps with rapid airborne transmission capability under specific atmospheric conditions, temperature-sensitive, moisture-reactive, designed for selective dormancy. Designed. I asked, who made it? He didn't answer that part. Just said the research had been buried, then picked up again. Not by the military, not by a nation-state. By private labs with deniable funding and cross-border reach, the kind of labs you don't find on the stock exchange, the kind that harvest DNA in one country, prototype in another, test somewhere no one can sue. He was brought in to help simulate containment responses, not cures, not medical countermeasures, just projections, modeling how fast it would spread, what systems would fail first, what level of civil disorder would occur after public denial collapsed. And then he looked at me and said something that made my blood run cold. I signed an NDA that expired when the stock markets did. He paid for the island plot 2 months later, gave me the southern bluff because he said the soil was better for filtration. I never questioned it. Now I know it wasn't about soil, it was about wind, prevailing air currents, coastline patterning, a model for minimizing exposure during the first drift events. He knew before I did. Not everything, but enough. And he didn't tell me because he didn't want me to panic. He knew what was coming, and he let us prepare. But only enough. Now I don't know if I trust him. I don't know if he trusts himself. But it doesn't matter, because trust is a luxury, and we burned through all of that when we sealed 2 of our own in a hut and started counting hours. And just when I thought the day couldn't get worse, something else came through the radio. A signal, short band, fragmented, origin unknown, but the ping bounce suggests Northern Hemisphere, Arctic Circle range, possibly from one of the old mobile research platforms that never got decommissioned. The voice was distorted, female, tired, the kind of tired that lives in the bones. English, not native, probably Scandinavian, Norwegian or Icelandic. She gave no name, no station code, just one sentence, repeated 3 times in broken clip transmission. Mutation confirmed in airborne strain. Internal growth now includes cognitive preservation window. Host may retain self-awareness for up to 16 hours post-infection. 16 hours. That changes everything. If that's true, then the people we see turning, screaming, stumbling, begging, may know what's happening to them. They may be conscious while the fungus rewires their body. Watching, powerless. That's not death. That's a prison. A second broadcast followed. Worse than the first. Spore propagation now includes subliminal trigger response. Infected may repeat phrases from memory to lure family members. Mimicry is not accidental, it is strategic. That's what it is now. Not just infection, not just survival. It's warfare. Biological, psychological. The line between a person and a carrier is no longer visible. You can't tell what's real. You can't trust voices. Because the fungus remembers how to cry. We played that transmission on loop for an hour. Maddie asked if it meant Callum could still be okay, if maybe he wasn't infected, if maybe he was just scared. I didn't answer her. I went outside, sat by the perimeter fence, listened to the ocean, felt the sky pressing down like wet wool, and I realized something I hadn't let myself admit until now. We're not trying to survive the end of the world. We're surviving the beginning of something else. And it doesn't want to kill us. It wants to use us. And if Grant knew that a year ago, then maybe the worst part isn't what he kept from me. Maybe it's what he's still not saying. If you've been waiting for a signal, I'm sorry. It wasn't a failure of the equipment. The batteries held. The antennas stayed up through the storms. But everything else fell apart. Not all at once. Not like a wall coming down. More like the tide pulling faster than we could build. We've had no rest, no rhythm, no safety. For a full week, the island has been under siege. Not by armies or weapons, not even by a swarm, but by the sea itself, vomiting out the consequences of the world we left behind. Boat. You already know about that. 5 dead. 1 bloated. 2 quarantined. A nightmare that set the tone for everything that came next. And I wish I could say that was the end of it. That we sealed the breach and held the line. But the breach kept coming, wave after wave, dragged in by current, by chance, or maybe by something more deliberate. The weather turned the next morning. Barometric pressure dropped again. Winds increased. Rain didn't stop for 4 straight days. The air turned milky. The visibility went down to 20, then 10, then less. And that's when they started arriving. Bodies. Not just 1 or 2. The first came in on the tide. A man in a floral shirt and swim trunks. Face down, no life. Obvious fungal bloom across the base of the skull. We burned him without hesitation. We thought he was an outlier, a remnant from the same wreck. But then, 2 more came the next evening. A woman in a cocktail dress, mid-30s, hair soaked in seawater, a wide stripe of mold down the spine, and her mouth was locked open like it had never stopped screaming. The second wore camouflage, digital print, torn body armor, no insignia, boots worn to the heel, a shard of radio wire still tucked behind the ear. By the 4th day, we'd counted 12. Most of them already dead, some still moving, barely, and a few still breathing, but not for long. We started building fences. Crude ones at first, driftwood lashed with rope. Then we turned to the scrap pile, aluminum paneling, old netting from when we used to fish offshore, anything that could form a barrier. We ringed the whole western shoreline and reinforced it nightly. We set up a perimeter fire pit. Grant activated motion-triggered UV lamps at the northern flank. Callum's old build diagrams became gospel. We didn't sleep. We didn't eat unless someone forced the issue. Eleanor rationed everything. Lila ran triage. I handled disposal. We burned 8 bodies in 2 days. And by the time we reached the 3rd, my hands stopped shaking. Some of the ones that made it ashore still had the strength to scream. Not words, just sound, pressure, a kind of guttural defiance that turned into a hacking wheeze as spores hissed out from ruptured lungs. One man, dressed like a cruise ship performer, full tuxedo with no shoes, staggered past the second fence before collapsing face first into the mud. When I rolled him over with a hooked pole, his skin split open along the jawline and something white squirmed underneath. He didn't get back up. We didn't wait for him to try. By day 5, the nets at the reef had caught something. We'd forgotten about the fat one from the fishing boat, the bloated infected that first tore its way onto our shores. Turns out it didn't wash out to sea after we fled. It had drifted, floated, gotten stuck near the rocks where we used to catch grouper back in the early days. The netting had snagged its shoulders, but its weight pulled it halfway through. It had been there all along, gurgling, twitching, seeping rot into the current. We hadn't heard it over the storm, hadn't seen it through the haze. But when the wind cleared and the sun broke through, Grant spotted the mass near the reef. At first we thought it was debris, then it moved. We burned it in place. Didn't go near it, didn't retrieve the net, just doused the reef edge with diesel and set a line from the shore. When the fire took, it burned blue. The smoke was black and oily, and it clung to the water for a long time. But it was gone. We thought that was the last of the nightmare. We were wrong. Callum and Ray didn't make it. I held out as long as I could. We kept them sealed in the quarantine hut, did twice daily checks, monitored their vitals through the glass. At first, it seemed like they might be clean, alert, hungry, cooperative. But then, Ray went quiet, stopped eating, sat in the far corner and didn't speak. Callum tried to keep him engaged, played cards, sang, even told a story through the door once. Something about his childhood on a farm, a dog named Tank, and a frozen pond. But by the 4th night, Ray collapsed, and Callum started shouting for help. By the time I got there, it was already too late. Ray was convulsing, his body twisted, mouth frozen in a soundless gasp. Callum had retreated to the opposite corner, begged me to open the door. I told him I couldn't, told him the protocol. He didn't argue. He knew. The next night, Callum stopped answering. No sound, no movement. I gave it 12 hours. Then I stood outside with the rifle. I didn't call out. I didn't announce it. I just waited. At dawn, the door opened. Callum stepped out, slow, stiff, skin pale, eyes wrong. He looked at me, and then he smiled. That smile was all I needed. One shot. Clean. He dropped where he stood. We torched the hut, everything inside, every scrap of cloth, every memory, gone in smoke. We are tired, all of us. That deep kind of tired that doesn't go away with rest, because it isn't about sleep. It's about erosion, of trust, of stability, of self. The fences have held so far. No new landings in the last 3 days. The ocean's gone still again. Too still. I walk the perimeter every 6 hours, but I can already tell from the quiet. The sea is waiting for something, planning its next move, if such a thing is possible. But it's not the sea that worries me now. It's us. I didn't expect things to unravel inside the wire so quickly. After we burned the quarantine hut, something changed between us. There was no ceremony, no burial, no words. Just flame, smoke, and silence. And now the silences between us linger longer, way heavier. Meals are short, curt. Eye contact is rare. No one wants to say what we're all thinking, that we might be infected already, even without symptoms, that one of us might be next. Eleanor has withdrawn. She spends most of her time in the northern tower now, reading through the few books we salvaged from the mainland. I've tried to speak with her, but she only responds when necessary. I can't blame her. She's processing it in her way. I see her watching me sometimes when she thinks I'm not looking. I know what she's looking for. Signs. Lila has stopped eating full meals, says she's not hungry, but I watch her hands when she drinks, trembling just enough to notice. When I offered her a protein bar yesterday, she turned it down and asked for canned pears instead. Something about the softness. She used to hate canned fruit. I think the quiet is worse than the danger. At least with the danger, you know what to react to. Now all we do is wait. We've turned this place into a fortress, but inside the walls, we're prisoners of our own thoughts. Maddie. She's holding on, but only because she's too young to understand the scale. She still believes this will end. That someone, somewhere, will find a cure. That help will come. She asked me yesterday if I ever heard from the president. I didn't know how to answer her. I told her the radios don't pick up much anymore, which is true. But the real truth is, there is no one left to hear from. Government isn't a thing anymore. It's just a word we remember. An echo from the before. Grant has become different. Distant. Calculating. I hear him pacing at night. Not just insomnia. This is something else. Movement with purpose. Like he's solving something in his head. Over and over. I confronted him yesterday. Asked if he was sleeping. He said yes. But I saw the tremor in his jaw, the hollow behind his eyes. He hasn't been to the outer perimeter in 3 days. He hasn't volunteered for anything involving contact. When I pressed him harder, he snapped at me, said he was doing the math. I asked what math. He looked me dead in the eye and said, food, power, air filters, fuel, people. People. Like we're part of a resource calculation now. That's when I realized what he's been thinking about. Not survival, not escape, triage. He's running numbers on how long we can stay sealed in, and what happens when we can't. I should have expected it. Grant's always been the logical one. But logic has its own flavor of cruelty. It strips away sentiment, reduces risk to numbers. And when you reduce people to numbers, you stop seeing them. I'm afraid of where that mindset might take him. Yesterday afternoon, I found a list in his room, handwritten, folded into a sealed envelope. Inside, projections. How long our supplies would last if we lost one mouth, then 2, then 3. My name wasn't on the essential column, neither was Elena's. Only Maddie's name was underlined. I haven't told Elena, I haven't told anyone. I should burn it, but I won't, not yet, because I need to know if he's just planning, or preparing. I caught a signal yesterday morning. Faint, almost gone. Shortwave, northeast band. I had to rotate the backup antenna manually to pick it up. It lasted for barely 4 minutes. It was from the coast of Maine. A woman's voice, older, sharp. A doctor, I think. She spoke in clipped sentences, fast, clinical. She said they'd identified a new symptom cluster in what she called dry zone conversions, areas where no bloom had occurred, but exposure symptoms were spreading. She called them carriers without bloom, said the fungus was mutating again, colonizing internally. No external signs, no eruptions, just behavioral decay. Her last sentence stuck with me. Some of them don't even know they're infected. They just feel different, detached, like something behind their thoughts is watching. I saved the signal, boosted it, played it for myself last night, alone in the station. Detached. That's what Grant is now. And I wonder, did something get through the airlock? Did something ride the wind past the filters? Did the spores settle not in the lungs, but deeper, somewhere else? I don't know, but I'm watching him now, always watching. 2 nights ago, Maddie came into our quarters and said something that made my skin go cold. She said she saw her dad talking to someone outside the fence. I asked what she meant. She said he was whispering, but there was no one there. She swore she heard another voice. When we checked the logs, there were no pings, no motion alarms, no thermal hits, no one. Unless something got through that knows how to stay still, Or, unless Grant's talking to something that isn't real anymore. This is my last broadcast, and this is how it ended. The morning it happened, the sky was clear for the first time in days. No haze, no thunder, no bodies at the shore. The water stretched flat all the way to the mainland, a line of steel under a pale sun. You could almost believe we were safe again. Almost. But nothing was right inside the compound. Grant hadn't been seen since the night before. He hadn't reported to the rotation shift, didn't show up for breakfast. I went looking for him and found his room empty. Mattress stripped, locker open. The envelope I found days earlier, gone. He'd taken it with him. Elena told me she heard movement outside during the night, heard the fencing creak. At the time, she thought it was just the wind, but there was no wind that night, just the sound of someone walking with purpose, softly, steadily, towards something. We found him by the western fence, sitting alone on the rocks where the last infected bodies had washed up. He had a portable rig beside him, one of our shortwave units, and a flare gun across his lap. He didn't look at us when we approached, just stared out at the water like he expected it to answer him. I called his name. Once, then again. The third time, he turned. His face was gaunt, pale, eyes sunk so far back they looked like they'd been borrowed from someone else. He hadn't slept, maybe not for days. He looked hollow. "It's here," he said. "It's already here." I asked what he meant. He just nodded toward the sea. "The tide doesn't bring them anymore. It brings it. It doesn't need bodies now. It has us." Then he said something I'll never forget. I hear it when I try to sleep, behind my thoughts. It's not a voice. It's a presence, like mold under wallpaper, like roots under stone. And it's in me, Mason. It's inside. I can't stop it. He said he'd known since the morning after the quarantine hut burned, that something got through the filters, maybe even before that. He said it didn't feel like a sickness, more like a pull, like a thread behind his eyes slowly tightening. I reached for him, tried to move closer, but he pulled the flare gun up just enough to make me stop. He wasn't threatening me, he was warning me. "I'm still me right now," he said, "but I won't be for long. I wanted to hold out, wanted to ration everything, keep us alive. But I've started seeing things, hearing things. Yesterday, I looked at Maddie and saw something that wasn't her. That's how I know it's real." He stood up, told me to get the others. He said he was running out of time and that his own mind was leaving him faster. We argued. Of course we did. Screamed, pleaded. Elena tried to talk him down. Maddie didn't understand. Lila just stood there, shaking her head, saying, "No, no, no." Like if she said it enough times, it wouldn't happen. But he was already gone. Not physically, but the part of him that thought he still had options. He had removed the western barricade, just one panel, enough to let something through, enough to lure something through. And when I realized it, I knew what I had to do. I found him at dusk, on the outer bluff. The signal rig was gone. He'd left it transmitting on loop, some old music track, static warped, barely recognizable. A beacon for anything left in the water. He stood facing the sea, arms open. I asked him if he was infected, but he didn't answer. I asked again. Still nothing. Then he turned and smiled. It was the same smile Callum wore, and I don't remember pulling the trigger. Only the sound. Only the way he dropped to his knees, and then sideways, into the shallow surf. We burned him there. I did it myself. I couldn't bury another body. Couldn't risk the ground turning soft again. Back at the compound, things fell into a quiet rhythm, a dead rhythm. We sealed the western fence, doubled the perimeter checks, rotated through tasks, spoke only when we had to. Lila went first. 3 days later, no symptoms, no warning. She just didn't wake up. Maddie's been quiet since. She doesn't speak much anymore, just draws in her notebook. I see the lines, shapes I don't understand, spirals, trees with roots that stretch past the page and vanish into the spine. Sometimes I think I hear her whispering to them. Elena has taken over the shortwave. She doesn't broadcast, just listens, waiting for something, a sound, a name, a voice. I asked her what she hopes to find. She said, "I don't know. I just need to know it wasn't all for nothing." As for me, waiting is no longer an option. This will be my last transmission from here. The air's shifted again. Not as heavy, not as charged. The spores aren't pushing anymore. They're settling. It's different now, quieter, smarter, like they've learned patience, like they understand that we're no longer resisting, just enduring, and endurance only lasts so long before it becomes surrender. I see the signs. I feel it in the walls, in the water, in the stillness between every heartbeat. Arcadia isn't safe, not because it's been breached, but because it will be. It's only a matter of time. The infection doesn't knock anymore, it seeps. So I've started packing. The yacht is still moored offshore, tethered to the southern buoy. We haven't touched it in months, not since the last full resupply run to the mainland before the satellites fell. I checked the fuel this morning. It's low, not empty. We only need enough to make it somewhere. I buried the last of the unused filters in a sealed container beneath the radio station floorboards. If someone finds this place, if you find this place, dig beneath the east wall. I left charts, notes, water treatment schematics, weather logs, everything I know about the drift and the patterns of spread. I left more than just warnings. I left tools. But I won't be here to explain them, and I won't wait for the air to grow quiet enough to kill us in our sleep. I'm taking Maddie. I haven't told Elena yet, but I think she already knows. I see it in her eyes. She doesn't expect to survive this island. Not anymore. But Maddie might. And if there's even a sliver of unburned land out there, somewhere with clean wind and growing things, then that child deserves a chance to see it. We'll head east. There were rumors once, before the radios went dark, of a chain of islets past the quarantine line. Too small to be worth securing. Too remote to be of strategic value. Maybe nothing's left. Or maybe something survived because no one thought it would. If this is the last you hear from me, remember, this place wasn't a sanctuary. It was a delay. And time has finally run out. But if you hear a new voice on the water, if the signal changes, it means we made it. And it means there's still something worth saving. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.